All right, good morning. Welcome to the week. I'm just going to repeat what I just said a minute ago. So Wednesday we'll test, so online folks, I'll have that in a folder ready for you to go to look at. Thursday, counselor stuff, online people. There is an online activity assignment kind of thing for you guys to do to get ready for. I don't know how yours is going to happen, but we won't have anything posted on Thursday or Friday. So those are both your days to kind of catch up on things while you're at home. Today we'll be given a graph and asked for the equation. Tomorrow we'll review. Wednesday we'll test. And again, it's all about understanding the relationship between the equation, the properties, and the graphs. If you understand those really well, all of the questions are related to those three things. I'll give you an equation and ask for a graph. I'll give you the properties and ask for an equation. I'll give you a graph and ask for the equation. So as long as you understand how all those things work together, you'll be fine. And I think most of you are there already. So today and tomorrow should just further your understanding of that. Let's look at worksheet 3, Friday's assignment. We did 3 together, and many of you finished the rest before you left because it was pretty quick. So you may not have looked at anything pre-cal wise since Friday, and that's okay if you're good to go. Is that what you finished? This is good. It's fun when that happens and you don't have pre-cal homework once in a while. Do you have questions from worksheet 3? Or was it so easy that no big deal? It's so easy that you didn't do it. That's not what we want to hear.
I did it too.
Let's see. Let's do number 8, just because that looks like it has all sorts of things going on with it. None of them really that hard, but it's got a little bit of everything. So number 8, and then we'll move on. Cosine function with an amplitude of 3, period of 3 pi over 4. Remember, this is the kind of the only piece that we have to be, got to be concerned with all of them, but this is the only one that causes any issues, really. Because the period is 2 pi over b, so that means 3 pi over 4 is equal to 2 pi over b. And sometimes it's easy enough to figure out what b should be. Other times you just want to cross multiply and let the algebra take care of itself. So 3 pi b equals 8 pi. So b equals 8/3. So yeah, that's kind of a weird one. That's not one you'd want to graph. That's not one that you could look at that and figure out what b is on your own, most likely without setting it up. So y equals amplitude 3 cosine, b is 8/3, pi over 3 to the left, so that would be x plus pi over 3, and a vertical shift of up 4. And again, we'll give you ones that are kind of complicated on this kind of worksheet, but we won't ask you to graph them because that would be weird to do a phase shift of pi over 3 and then a period of 3 pi over 4, because it would end at, 4/12 plus 13/12. We don't want to mess with that. That would be awful. All right, well, let's flip to the next page and see how quickly we can understand what this is asking. We'll do this worksheet kind of like we did last worksheet. We'll do the first 2 together, and then you'll be off and running. So writing equations from graphs. So a lot different from the worksheet we were just looking at. But if you can get the information, the characteristics from the graph, then you can use the characteristics to write the equation. So it's real similar to what we just did, except instead of me telling you what all these things are, you got to look at the graph and figure out what they are. So maybe some steps to think about. I don't know if these are even steps, things that will help. Draw the midline. I'm thinking about A, B, C, D, the D, how far up and down it goes. Some people mess that up if they don't take the time to draw that center line. So draw the center line. That'll help you figure out how far up and down you went. And then secondly, know the X scale. Sometimes it's easy to figure out what the period is. Other times it's more about counting the blocks. But you got to know what the scale is or what the grid is. And I already did that for this one because I was working on my own trying to figure this one out. And it's like, well, let me figure out each grid is worth pi over 4. So once we know for sure where the midline is, once we've got the grid outlined, then we're ready to answer these questions. So you tell me, looking at that picture, what's the amplitude of that graph? One. It goes one above and one below the midline. All right, the period is from peak to peak. Like even though it says for sine, so I guess you could start, maybe that would be wiser. Sine starts here and starts over here. So if I'm trying to figure out the period, just overkill this here. So one cycle of sine would be that. And so how wide is that? Well, let's count our grids. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 grids. But each scale or each tick mark, 8 tick marks maybe, was pi over 4. So our period is 2 pi. Some people can look at that and see that it's 2 pi because it's like, well, from negative pi to pi, that's kind of a weird spot on the graph, but it's the same spot on the graph. Right? From there to there is one period, and so that's 2 pi. And so some people are more methodical about counting the grids from start to finish. Others can look at it and kind of eyeball it. Either way is okay. Right? Phase shift. Well, if this was our starting point, you know what? Kind of making this up on the fly here, but a third thing we should probably do is highlight one cycle. Highlight one cycle. I already did that. That'll help you find the period. It'll also help you find the phase shift. So the phase shift was left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grids or 5 tick marks. So that would be 5 pi over 4 to the left. That's the way I interpreted that graph. But there's another answer to the phase shift. Anybody want to offer another answer for the phase shift? Right 3 pi over 4. Because you could say, well, I think mine started here, and that would be right 3 pi over 4. So either one would be okay. And in fact, there's more than that, because if you really got creative and went way out here, wherever it crosses again, you could say right whatever the next one is, or the next one, or the next one. So there's really infinite answers to what the phase shift is. Most everybody's going to say one of the closest two, either the one to the left or the one to the right. And either one's okay. How about vertical shift? This is why we drew the midline. Vertical shift? See some hesitant head shakes, meaning no, there's not one. It's centered around 0. Okay, well now we turn this this problem into exactly like the ones from Friday, because we've got the information and we want an equation. So y equals amplitude of 1. We're writing a sine curve, so sine b. Oh, I didn't find b yet, but this is an easy one. If the period is 2 pi, what's b equal to? 1. So there's no work extra to find that. X, I'm going to say plus 5 pi over 4. But again, if you said minus 3 pi over 4, that would be equally accurate, equally acceptable. Abby?
So if amplitude's just 1, do you have to write the 1?
Right. You don't need this one or this one.
Okay.
That's just kind of emphasizing there's b is 1 and amplitude is 1, but you don't have to write those. All right, let's do number 2. Now we're viewing that as a cosine wave. So let's draw the midline, let's know the scale, let's highlight one cycle before we start answering these questions. It goes from -3 to 3. So my midline is at 0. In fact, we could kind of work these. We don't have to work them in order. The vertical shift then is 0. The amplitude is 3. Period. Oh no, let me highlight one cosine wave and then we'll figure out what the period is. So there's a cosine wave. Start and finish. Let's see, each grid is pi divided by 1, 2, 3, 4. So each tick mark is worth pi over 4. So from peak to peak, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 pi over 4, also known as 2 pi. That's probably our favorite period because then we don't have to mess around with b. What do you want to use for the phase shift? There's 2 options, but I would use the close one as well. So that would be right pi over 4. But if you wrote left 7 pi over 4, that would be okay as well. And so this is one where my key for this test is going to have 4 or 5 different answers depending on what combination of phase shifts you picked. So we've got everything. So y equals 3, cosine b is 1, x minus pi over 4, and no vertical shift. Now what I want to do, because it does this on the test, and I don't want you to be surprised or confused when it happens, and that is look at the same graph and treat it as a sine graph. So I'm going to pick a different color to highlight because now it's a sine graph. So now and you guys have noticed this before, like the sine and cosine graphs look the same. So you can, if it didn't specify, you could call this a cosine or a sine graph. So now I want to call it a sine graph, which means it would start at the 0. So what's the amplitude if it's a sine graph? Some of these are the same. Yeah, it's still 3. Its period is still the same because you can still measure from peak to peak or valley to valley or start to start. So its period is still 2 pi. What about its phase shift? Yeah, this one would be left pi over 4. Or right, however many that is, 7 pi over 4. So vertical shift is 0. And so this is always the case. The only thing that's different about cosine versus sine is the phase shift. Right? And that when we first did these, nobody used that terminology, but that's what you guys noticed. You're like, hey, look, sine and cosine are just like left-right shifts from each other. Well, that shows up in all these properties as well. Same amplitude, same period, same vertical shift. It's just a different starting point. So y equals 3 sine x plus pi over 4 plus 0 if you want to throw that on the end of that. So again, we can ask you to identify those graphs as either cosine or sine graphs. And most of the time we'll specify which one we want you to do, but there's one of them on the test where we give you one picture and ask for both equations. Give me a sine equation and give me a cosine equation. All right, I feel pretty good. Answers are posted, so your job is to try the rest of them. And answers are posted in Schoology, and I've got them. I'll have them up here somewhere for you to compare. And then, if you wanted to get started, the next page is the review. The next worksheet's the review. So we'll spend time tomorrow going over it. But if you have time today and you want to get started on it so you know what questions to ask, then that will certainly be okay.